his kind of playful and humorous side would come out, which was always loved to see that. And I think of how my mother, when my mother was there, she always wore this big watch on a chain around her neck. And Swami seemed to think that that was the oddest thing in the world, which you think, he would be then like the little boy from a little town in a little village in southern India rather than the avatar, you know. And he would come over and stand in front of mother and rock back and forth and go tick tock, tick tock, tick tock.
Sairam, dear listeners, welcome to Sai SOUL 100. Our guest today is Sister Heidi King, who is joining us from New York. Sairam, Sister Heidi, thank you for joining Sai SOUL 100. Please share your story.
I guess first I'll say that I arrived at Brindavan, actually, which is where Swami was in January of 71. And I stayed there, basically, did little traveling a few times, but basically I was there until August of 73. And I have to say, of all things, that experience, that time in my life is still the most important part of my life. And I think about it all the time. And I guess you could say I meditate and contemplate on it a lot, and it becomes richer to me over the years, I think. But I felt that he taught me from the inside out. It wasn't so much him saying, do this or do that, you know, but it was putting me into situations that made me see what I was doing and who I was and what I needed to do. And that happened repeatedly. And also in many little ways, how he would show that he knew what was going on. And another little example of that, when my parents were there, and we did get called into the house to be in the house every day, which was wonderful. It was like my dream come true. And I remember in one of these interviews, I was sitting right next to him, to his chair. And I had often thought before this, I had seen the things that he materialized and thought to myself, oh, that looks kind of chintzy, like something you buy out in the bazaar. So this day I'm sitting there next to him and he leans down and kind of whispers to me, Swami has diamonds and jewels and gold in his hands. And then he materialized what really was a very beautiful Mangala Sutra from my mother. And maybe I should tell that taxi story because that's what everybody likes to hear. That's the by far the most incredible miracle that I experienced there. And this is also when my parents were there and coming in the house every day. And we would come in the afternoons, and Swami would often he'd call in the college boys and talk to them. Or maybe he would talk to all of us, the various, these were usually the older Westerners in the room. And so there was this one evening after, you know, and it's getting kind of late. So my parents and I ended up sharing a taxi back to Bangalore with the Hislovs who were there at that time. So this taxi driver was very impatient. We were going back in and he's stuck behind a lorry. So, of course, he honks his horn, pulls out around this truck to pass it without, you know, looking or anything. And there, right in front of us, is another car speeding towards us. And it should have been 1 second and that car would have slammed into us. We were both going at good speed. But instead, in 1 second, the car was gone. I looked around out the back window of the taxi, and I could see the lights of the backlights of the car going on down the road. So it was as though that car, or either our taxi full of people or that car, whatever it was dematerialized and then rematerialized on the other side of the vehicle. Because, you know, it should have been just like that in a second. And I imagine we all would have been seriously injured or dead because, there were no airbags or seat belts or anything in those cars. But it was so kind of incredible that almost even at the time, I felt like I only half believed it. Anyway, the next day we're back in Baba's house, and we were there in the mornings and in the afternoons. And Baba had been talking to us all. And after this was all done, we were about ready to go. Hislop gets up and bows to Baba and says, "Swami, we want to thank you." And Swami stopped him right there. And then Swami described just what had happened. And he said, "You were all too shocked to call on Swami." Not only were we too shocked, there was no time. And then he said, "Swamiji's protection, Swamiji's protection." So I still think about that incident probably about every day, and I still wonder, it still seems like it's unbelievable, and I can't quite believe it actually happened, but obviously it did. So, and I think now that probably of all the people in that taxi, I'm probably the only one still alive, and I'm including the taxi driver, of course. But what to make of that, it was, I still don't know what to make of it, but it certainly has influenced, I guess, how I think about Swami, because even when he has promised, say, to do things and then not done it, or not healed somebody, which did happen as well, I always think that it's not because he couldn't have done that, but he chose for a reason I don't understand not to do it. And that did happen as well. I remember again, there was a woman there who had come with her husband who had a very serious case of rheumatoid arthritis. He was in a wheelchair and he was not well at all. And actually, he had been in an interview that my friend Michelle was in, and she said afterwards that Swami had taken this man's hand and lifted him up out of the wheelchair, and it was the first time he had walked in years. So it looked like he was healing this man. But then later, a couple weeks later, just to set the scene for this, some of us used to hang out outside. Swami's house had the driveway came in and there was a wrought iron gate across it. And when Swami went out to some evening function in Bangalore, he would come back, drive up that driveway. And the few of us would often wait outside that gate, hoping to get a chance to talk to him. And he often would get down and walk into the house and stop and talk to us on the way in. So this was an evening like that, and I was there and a few others, including this woman's husband, this man's wife. And she was very upset because apparently her husband had taken a turn for the worst. And she had said something to him like she had this regime she had him on with very strict diet and all this stuff. And I guess he had started to go off that and was refusing to adhere to it. And she had said something to him like, "Oh, okay, if you don't want to live, go ahead and not do this." And then she felt very guilty about this. And he was, as I said, she was very upset because he had gotten worse. So we were waiting out there, and Swami did come in, got down from his car and walked in, and this woman was, trying to get his attention. He just walked right by her and paid no attention at all and went on into his house. And then I sat out there with this woman for a long time, was just talking. Why had Swami done this? Why had he not responded to her? And I've thought about these things too, but I definitely feel that he had reasons for everything that he did. And I don't know what the reason is. And I don't think it's my place to try to judge it at all. But I guess going through that other miracle has given me more faith in that, because I always think of that. But Swami, I think, was much more complicated and a much tougher teacher, I think, than a lot of us maybe want to or able to recognize. I feel like he was really a very tough teacher because he wanted to push us to grow, or as he used to say, there are a few things I always remember about his teachings, because, you certainly can't remember them all. But one of them always was that I give you what you want so that you will come to want what I have to give. And I think it's our spiritual growth that he really had to give, and that he wanted to give to us all, or wanted to help us achieve, you might say. And that often took shaking us up and creating situations that are difficult for us. And if you read his teachings, you'll see this over and over again, that he talks about how suffering and difficulties are things we should appreciate and honor, and that they're the things we grow through. And I certainly found that to be true in my experiences there.
Sairam, Sister Heidi, thank you so much for sharing your story. I just love the fact that your taxi story is a powerful one, because that allowed you to have the faith that was needed to trust all of the other things that Swami was testing us with, right?
Yeah.
Even though, like you mentioned, Swami can heal anybody at any time he chooses, but sometimes he chooses not to. At least in our eyes, it looks like he's not, right? But there is a reason behind it, and that faith that developed because of the taxi incident is enough for you to have faith that there is a good reason why Swami is also doing this. And throughout to our human eyes and our experiences, we might not see what Swami is seeing.
Yeah. If I could say one thing about this faith thing of also his teaching, I think it was the first group interview that I was in with the group of young Westerners. It was right before Shivaratri of 71. And he called us all. And at one point, he asked, as he often would in an interview, he would throw out questions to people. And he asked, what does it mean to surrender to God? Or what is surrendering to God? And some young man raised his hand and said, it means giving your mind and your heart and your life to God, something like that. And Swami said, all hot air and gas, which I like the way he puts things. And he said, you can't give to God what you don't control to begin with. And he said, surrender to God is to see God everywhere. And he said also that that's faith. And I've always remembered that as a teaching. I think it's a very core teaching. It means seeing God, including in the things we don't like, in the people that maybe annoy us and make us angry or upset us, in the situations that we don't like. It's easy to see God when everything is nice and going wonderfully. Not so easy when that's not the case.
Because you lived there for 2 years. It was actually more than 2 years. And you actually lived in Swami's presence. Can you share a little bit more about your experience there?
Well, I can say one thing, that being in Swami's presence, I was always tongue-tied when I was with him. I think now if I were to go back, I could ask him about this, that, or the other thing. But at that time, even if I had lots of doubts and questions, when I was actually in his presence, it would all disappear. And I would feel just totally confident, totally fulfilled, like I needed absolutely nothing else. And I always felt like, and he didn't even have to be in the room, just like being in his house when my parents were there. I felt like I could have sat there forever, and there was nothing else I needed at all. And that was a wonderful feeling. However, it didn't help that I had opportunity that I could have asked him about more things, but as I said, it just went out of my mind. And I also maybe want to reference a side of Swami that you kind of don't see when you're just sitting outside in darshan, when he can come out and seem so serious. Or like Shirdi Ma used to tell stories of how it was in the early days, how casual, and he would go around just talk to people, and she would say, and now he walks around like he just came down from heaven, which I thought was kind of a. But when you were in his house or in a smaller group with him, his kind of playful and humorous side would come out, which was always loved to see that. And I think of how my mother, when my mother was there, she always wore this big watch on a chain around her neck. And Swami seemed to think that that was the oddest thing in the world, which you think, he would be then like the little boy from a little town in a little village in southern India rather than the avatar, And he would come over and stand in front of mother and rock back and forth and go tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. Or he would take a hold of this watch and go up and down and say heavy, heavy, as though he was just fascinated by the fact that she was wearing this watch like that. Which I find that very amusing, and I loved seeing that side of him. There was a woman who came from, an older woman from California, who would play with him in a way I'd never seen anybody else do. And she would joke and she would pretend that she was trying to sing a bhajan and screw it all up. And then he would mimic her. And he seemed to love interacting with somebody like that on a much more casual sort of way. And I would think to myself, well, that it made a certain kind of sense, when everybody's always just being so, in such awe of you and kind of holding you at arm's length. And he would say, treat me like your brother-in-law. So he seemed to kind of encourage people to be a little more casual like that. Of course, it couldn't happen in the big crowds, it just wasn't possible. But it was a great blessing, I thought, to be able to see that side of him. Mm-hmm.
Oh, it certainly does sound so amazing, actually, to witness how he is in his own home, how casual, how jovial, how childlike to an extent.
Yeah. Yes, it was a real childlike quality. But when I was there, I used to love to talk to the people who had been there for years before me and the real old stories. And I remember Bhajan Vijaya and her mother and her sister, who had lived there at the ashram for a long time, also talk about how in the old days, when there were only a few people there, that Swami would walk around and just talk and joke with people and drop into people's rooms and talk in this very casual manner. But they also said that even back then, some people would come that he would just ignore. And, he's a real past master at ignoring people. He has a great talent for that, or he had a great talent for that. And they would say that back then, when his mother was still alive, that his mother would be upset by this, and she would see these people that he had been ignoring. And they said also that sometime he and his mother would have these kind of arguments as who was the greatest. Was he the greatest because of what he was doing, or was she the greatest because she had given birth to him? And again, I would listen to this and just think what a funny scene it must have been. It's hard to imagine. I think the celebration that impressed me the most, actually, was at Dasara. I think this would have been the second year I was there. And what really impressed me was the poor feeding, and that hundreds of people, these people you can't imagine, people rolling around on the ground on little platforms with wheels on them, and very poor people, and all of these people coming and sitting in the whole compound on the ashram was filled with these long lines of people. And we had been up all night cutting vegetables. The men were cooking them in these huge big pots in these pits in the ground. And then Swami came out and was serving all these people, and out there in the hot sun, and he's wiping the sweat off his brow, and for a long time, serving everybody, and then going out after the feeding and giving cloth to everybody. And that was very impressive to me and very moving. And it was also impressive to me on the part of these people who came, how much joy and happiness they seemed to get from this little bit of contact with Swami. And I was thinking of myself that I felt like I was never satisfied and I always wanted more. And here are these people who are so appreciative. So that was a lesson to me as well. And speaking of human being or avatar, I have one little piece I wrote on a journal when I was there, and I'm kind of going back over it recently, putting it together as a consistent manuscript. And if I could read one little bit from the time when my parents and I were in his house, and this is from the 16th of February in 1973. And it says, in response to a number of questions, Swami spoke at length about various avatars. He said that there is only one avatar to an age, but there are many Mahapurushas, such as Christ, Buddha, or Muhammad. Someone asked if there had been any avatars since Krishna. Swami was silent for a moment. He was sitting on the floor at this point, on this rug that's on the floor in the side room of his house where people come and sit. Swami was silent for a moment, seeming to be concentrating on a bit of red fuzz from the rug he was playing with. Then, with that funny little boy smile, he laughed and tossed the bit of fuzz towards us, saying, "You're sitting in the presence of the avatar." This was done in such an embarrassed, off-handed manner. It was as though he was saying, "What the hell, listen to that." It was so sweet and wonderful that I could hardly keep from crying. So that was one of these little interactions with Swami in that room.
Thank you for reading from your journal. I mean, that's very raw observation in his presence that you were able to share right now, and a powerful message as well, for Bhagavan to sit there and say, you're looking at the next avatar and you're in the presence of avatar and you don't even realize it. And the way he said it is more kind of like no authority, just like very humble.
Just, this is what is, almost like no big deal. This is what is, But he would often just say, I know Hisoff would always come and kind of be questioning him. And he would ask him, how come in the past people didn't seem to recognize Krishna as an avatar, or Rama as an avatar? And now so many thousands recognize you. And Swami would say, no, they don't. He would say, almost nobody knows who I really am. And I think that was true too, because his form was so compelling, shall we say, and that you almost couldn't help but think that that was who he actually was. And even though he would put it in many different ways, many times, that he was not really that form.
And we couldn't get past his form to see who he really was.
Yeah. It's true. So in a way, it could almost be an obstacle to be there with his form, because it was that compelling and it kind of kept you stuck in that particular place. But he would also say, don't try to figure out who I am, figure out who you are. And that's another one of these teachings that I've continued to think about and has meant a great deal in my life.
Sairam, Sister Heidi, thank you so much for sharing these beautiful first-hand experiences with Swami. Very, very blessed that you are able to experience that and for you to narrate that story for all of us to listen to.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I hope I can give a little bit of the feeling of what it was like to be around him.
Yes.
And I still, despite the fact of all these teachings I say about the form or finding him inside, I still miss being being with that form because there's nothing like it. And I often would try to think, what is it about this that's so special? I never could quite put my finger on it.
Yeah, so you were in his presence, you experienced being with him, but you were able to take away from that he's actually living from a different place. He's not in our world, but he gives us the illusion uh, that he is actually with us and one of us, and being jovial, being firm, being strict, being, giving everything that we all go asking for, right? But there's much more to it that we actually don't really understand.
Yeah.
Sairam, Sister Heidi, thank you so much.
So Sairam, thank you again, and may his blessings be with everybody.
Jai Sairam. Sairam, dear listeners, thank you for listening to Sai Soul 100 with Sister Heidi King. I'm Prabha Swaminathan. Until next time, Jai Sairam.